Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Radically Loved. I'm joined by a very special guest slash friend slash somebody I haven't talked to in a very long time. She's a teacher, she's an educator, and Maygen Nicholson is on. Actually, what are the pronouns you actually want me to use?
If you could use they, them, that would be great. It's just those
They,
are
l-
pronouns I'm exploring currently.
yeah, I love that. And it's actually a question that I want to dive into a little bit, especially in the world of wellness, because I love that we are bringing, um, more awareness and attention to the way people identify, because I feel like it really creates a level of respect and a level of seeing somebody else. And the only thing I can compare it to is, um, my name, my not legal name, but it's like my birth certificate name is Rocio. And not a lot of people know that. And it got changed. Everybody calls me Rosie. My family calls me Rosie. But it changed in school because my kindergarten teacher couldn't pronounce it. So then it was like, oh, you're Rosie. It's easier for me. And I didn't actually think about it very much. It was kind of like, oh, I always had anxiety whenever anybody would call out my name because I knew that they weren't going to be able to pronounce it. But it wasn't until I was much older, like in my 20s, where it actually started the sort of um, experience behind somebody not being able to say your name right, and that little bit of anxiety where it's like people would kind of disregard it, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, you know? So I know that being identified by a specific pronoun that you feel more in alignment with is important, because I compare, oh, it's as important as somebody saying my name correctly. Because I've had these conversations with people that are like, oh, I don't understand what the big deal is. And I'm like, well, the big deal is somebody has a, a, a desire to be called by the right name, right? By their
Exactly.
name. So, anyway, sorry I got on a little pedestal there. Or pulpit. I was on my pulpit, like just trying to insert myself.
No,
I
I
how
think it's good to have those moments where you can find a parallel of understanding why honoring people's pronouns and their names and every part about them, right, is so important. And um, I mean, we can go into the depths of all the education around this, but what I will say, which we won't do today because we don't have enough time, but what
I
I
was like,
will
oh.
say, you're like, no, don't have time. But what I will say is that there have been studies that have shown that when you affirm somebody in their identity, so that means using their correct pronouns, their names, uh, referring to them in ways that feels really good and affirming to them, that it drastically decreases mental health risks by,
Mm,
I mean, massive proportions.
wow.
Um, and so I think, we do always want to fit people in boxes, right? Like with your name, it's people started calling you Rosie because it was just easier, which is incredibly problematic and racist in of itself. But that's very similar to what happens to trans folks or gender non-conforming folks. It's like, I see you this way, and so I'm going to call you these things because it's what's comfortable for me. In the meantime, the person that you're misgendering or referring to in ways that doesn't feel good is causing reactions, internal reactions
Mm,
in their body, that could be linked to gender dysphoria, which is
mm,
in the DSM-5 list and is problematic. But for lack of a better phrase for it, it's a visceral reaction in people's bodies that then goes to their brains and creates psychological distress that tells them, I don't belong.
mm.
My identity doesn't exist, right? And so if that's happening to folks every all day long, then it's compounding. And then people may also, like, it in in my like gender journey. I've definitely experienced every time I'm assumed, I experience the symptoms of being gaslit. So
Mm.
I start to question if I am who I say I am, if what I'm fighting for is a lost cause, just all the things that I know to be true. I start to question all of those things and I start to experience a lot of doubt. And, so I'm really passionate about folks really learning how to let go of those assumptions and to move more into to me, it feels just like a more caring place,
Yeah.
even down to, anybody. What name would you like to be called? Not just giving people nicknames, right? Just
Right.
because that feels good for you. Or, even down to like some people don't want to be called love or girl or dude, even if they aren't queer or trans or gender nonconforming. So this is a practice for everybody, right? It
Yeah.
supports everybody being affirmed.
Yes. Oh, this is so good. And I say that, and I'm a dude. I'm a dude-er. I dude everybody, and I bro everybody. It's a Southern California thing. I don't know what it is, but even my girlfriends, I'm like, bro, like this is, so to me it's interesting, and I personally want to be educated, and I want to really honor people, and I want to be able to give people that respect, so I'm always, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show. Obviously we wanted to talk about this just to give people a little background. I know we kind of went in, but Maygen and I did a training together years ago.
I don't
Uh
even, was it like 2015 or
oh wow.
14?
I
It was
don't
a
know.
while ago.
It's a really many years ago. It was, I think, when Wanderlust Studio Hollywood just opened. I can't even
Yeah.
remember, but it's been
Well, it
many
was a few
years.
years after it had opened, but yeah,
Okay. Anyway, and see, huh?
you got it.
They back then it was different, right? But they were so loving and just awesome. Like they just had this cool vibe about them, and they were just very like, not everybody in the class was as um excited about learning about new things, and we were learning a specific system of teaching. And I don't know why, but I just really resonated with them, and I'm so happy to have you on the show to talk about this, because one of the main things that we discussed briefly was this whole idea about inclusivity, and inclusivity especially in the wellness space.
Yeah.
So where, especially after the year that we've had, with a lot of people being way more vocal and now are being more magnified, the voices are being magnified, there's been more attention put on it. Where are the holes still? And how can we continue to do better, especially in and I don't remember exactly because I know we keep adding, it's the SBA, LGBTQ
The 2S
plus
LGBTQIA plus
2S.
community.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, educating, it's like I have to learn. And I do have, I mean, I grew up with having uh, gay uncles and
Mhm.
gay aunts that identified, in their own experience, especially they've been that way like my entire life. And to just hear um the disrespect that would come with people's prejudices and lack
Mhm.
of education, and how upsetting that was for them.
Yeah.
I'm so happy now that this is a bigger conversation, and as uncomfortable, I mean, it's uncomfortable for me because like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Like, I don't want to
Right.
offend anybody. And I think that that's the biggest problem. It's like, so because you don't want to offend, you just don't say anything. That's not the point either. right? It's
Right. We
like,
see that in, the practice of anti-racism. A lot of people get stuck because they don't want to say, speak things out that need to be called out because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And um, you will be corrected, and as scary as it is, you have to start somewhere. And I'm within the wellness industry in particular. I mean, I taught yoga for probably 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. And I moved away from teaching yoga during COVID because it was a really great time to to go a
right.
completely different direction. And I was really being pulled in more of the education realm and really, really supporting my community. But I was able to really see the work that needs to be done within the wellness industry, being so immersed in it. And I also taught a queer and trans only yoga class weekly for like 5 years or something like that. And part of the class, we would practice yoga, asana, meditation, pranayama. And then the last half hour, we would sit in a tea circle and just discuss a topic of the night. And, hearing everybody's experiences and why most of them only practice yoga with me. Because, which is, you know, you would think in Los Angeles, of all places, that it would be very open and welcoming, but it's not. And what's really disheartening about it is that these tools and practices are most needed for marginalized people, right? Um, they're a healing space to be used in these containers to be removed from the world that doesn't want them to exist, period. Right. So to then go into a wellness space, and it's just already a vulnerable space, and then to be met with harm, mostly covertly, meaning it's done very subtly and probably without the harm doers understanding that they're even causing harm. Right. But that's the issue, is that lack of understanding. And so it's everybody's responsibility to learn and to do better. And it is a practice, right? And it takes time, and it's a lifelong practice. It is yoga, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
if we get down to the roots of yoga, social justice is a part of it, and every person is included in the practice. And not only that, the place where it's from, India, they have their own gender non-conforming person named Hydra, I believe, and they're revered. They're spiritual beings, and they can be along the spectrum of trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming or intersex. And so if we're going to really do the practice of yoga, then you have to do the whole practice, right? And so it's very clear whenever a trans person or a queer person walks into a space, and the person who is teaching or leading hasn't done any work. It's very apparent. In so many different aspects, right? Like the way that you talk about or refer to bodies, the way you assume people's pronouns, the way you cue and lead the class. I mean, it's very apparent whenever it's not a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, and like I said before, that if we think about this work is for everybody, all people, right? Like this work liberates us all. Um, it's work that has to be done for everybody.
Yeah.
And not only that, I dealt with an issue with a colleague of mine. Their name is Tristan Katz. We put out a public statement. I don't know if you saw this whole thing, but it was the Jay Brown Yoga podcast. He put out a really incredibly transphobic um, podcast episode with a woman named Kachi Ananda, who kind of just spews like these conspiracy theories. She's very much a TERF, which stands for trans exclusionary radical feminist. And she, in the yoga space, spread lies that now people believe because they're convenient lies to believe, right? Because then it means we don't have to do any work. We don't have to confront these things that make us uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, beyond just learning language, there are actual transphobic, really high threats happening in yoga and wellness spaces that then trickle out into bigger things that are happening, like in policy, right? Like we have this year, like I think it's 144 anti-trans bills introduced all over the nation, right? And it starts with these ideologies and these conversations. That's where these stem from. So the more of us that are doing this work, the more that we can support the entirety of all the work that needs to be done to support the entirety of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community.
Right. Oh, I love that so much. Like how can we begin that process, for the people that have a desire to learn, like where do they begin? I'm looking at it from the perspective of teachers specifically because you're holding space for everybody. So
Right.
if you're holding space for everybody, it's not, you're not required to do anything, right? But to me, if your desire is to lead people through the practice of yoga, it's important for everybody to be seen. And I think about it the same way as anti-racism works, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like you have to
Yeah.
be an anti-racist. You have to be able to educate yourself in a way that people feel welcome, and not as a way for you to feel bad about yourself, but it's like it's learning. Educate yourself. You think about the moments when I'm speaking again specifically to yoga teachers, we all started from somewhere. We didn't know anything. We didn't know how to teach a class.
Right.
We didn't know how to hold a space. We didn't know how to do anything. We have to humble ourselves to not know anything. That's part of
Right.
the process of learning. And I think, to me, I it's uncomfortable to not know, right? It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable to not know, but instead of just glazing over it and making somebody else feel unseen, ask the questions, right? Like educate yourself in a way so that you feel more equipped to be open to holding space for everybody. So
Right.
in saying that, how do we begin this process? Like, is this an individualized type of thing where somebody comes into our life that says, these are my pronouns, this is what I identify as? Or is it on us to figure it out without asking somebody?
It's every person's responsibility to do the work, whether or not you have somebody in your life. It's also really important to know that it is not um, a trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming person's job to educate you. I've signed up for this work. This is the work that I do, and there are plenty of people who do it. And so there's lots of spaces that you can go to learn. I host a lot of workshops. I host a lot of workshops specifically for wellness and movement practitioners. So you can, learn with me. I also suggest learning with lots of other folks because the whole community is everybody, right? Like there are Black trans folks, we're everybody, right? There are disabled trans folks. So you have to really be in the entirety of all of the work. And I, as a white person, and an able bodied person, have a lot of privilege in the community. And so I'm working to expand my lens too, right? To be able to hold the whole community in a really intersectional way. However, there's always going to be things that I miss because it's not a part of my lived experience. And so it's really important that you're learning from people of all different identities, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all going to have different lenses and ways of teaching, and also that you're going to have to hear the same thing over and over and over and over again for you to really get it. And that's normal, right? And so I would say being in learning spaces is the best place to start, right? Because the first step is like dismantling all your biases around gender, or like
Mm-hmm.
learning what you don't know about it,
Yeah.
and queer identities as well, right? Like the entirety of all of the identities. Another really great organization is the Trans Yoga Project. There are 8 members, and they're all trans, and they are doing incredible work educating within the yoga community. And so I highly recommend them. My colleague Tristan Katz, they are an incredible educator as well. Maybe we can put some
Yeah.
resources in
Yeah,
the show notes.
we'll definitely add all of those links in the
Okay,
show
cool.
notes.
But yeah, so I would just say that that's a really good place to start, and to also understand that that's not the end point, right? Like a lot
Right.
of people think I just learned how to say things in the right, quote unquote, right way, and then I'm good to go. And it's like, no, that's actually just like where you began, right? Because what I want you to do is to let go of any need to assume in the first place, right? Like
Mhm.
that we look at somebody and we just know who they are, right?
Right.
Like that's what we're dismantling there. But that's the first step, because there's many more things happening in the world that need everybody's help and support.
Yes.
But expanding your knowledge around lived experiences outside of your own is the first place to start.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's so good. It just reminds me, growing up in a very majority Hispanic neighborhood, but as I got older, I went to high school in Alhambra and Monterey Park, which has a large population of different types of Asian cultures, and
Mm.
learning that not everybody's Chinese. There's Vietnamese, there's Filipino, there's
Right.
Indonesian, there's, you know, Korean, there's all these different types of um, different cultures within the Asian community, in the South Asian community.
Yeah.
Um, so understanding that the more we know, the more we can really create that container space. And it's not
Right.
like what you're saying. It's like it's not just about knowing the language and sounding like you know what you're talking about. It's really about having other people feel seen and heard.
Right.
And I think that it really is an important conversation for us to have. What do we do in a situation where, yeah, like we can identify people that are a little bit more resistant and that maybe don't want to learn. I was going to say conform, but it's like that's kind of a harsh word to say as well. It's
Yeah.
like to conform to the new ways. This is how it's going to be. Get
We're
into
moving
it.
away from conforming.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but so like just to educate ourselves to learn more. I'm thinking about what you just said earlier. I don't know about. I think I saw you post something about the situation with this person on Jay Brown's podcast, but
Yeah.
I've not listened to it ever. So I
Please
don't
don't.
yeah. So
That's
I
awful.
don't know, like in a situation like that, you know, and this isn't a it's not a call for people to perpetuate more of that, like, oh, let's call this person out or cancel this person, because I'm also not a fan of that. I think
Hmm.
it's important for us to take responsibility and to educate ourselves and do our best to make sure
Right.
that our people, especially you know, people that feel marginalized, that they feel protected. I mean, that's the whole
Right.
idea. It's like, how do we create a container where everybody feels seen, where everybody feels heard, specifically this community? You know, it's like to be
Right.
margin. I mean, I remember during the Black Lives Matter movement, and it was like Black trans lives matter. Like this was a big thing,
Hmm.
and I didn't feel like that got as much attention as it should have. You know,
Oh
because
no,
I'm
it
like,
it doesn't. Like you don't hear about the Black trans women specifically that are killed. Like we don't see that in mainstream media, right? So there are really big conversations to be had, and it's really urgent. The numbers of Black trans folks that are murdered every year are going up and up and up, and nobody knows about it because it's not in mainstream media, right? And so I feel like, within accountability, which is the process that we went through with Jay Brown, which actually did end up moving into what I would call not canceling, but divesting, because we needed people in our community to know that he is not safe, and we needed our allies to stand in solidarity with us. Um, So there's accountability processes like that then sometimes have to turn into divestment just for to in that protection, in
Can
the
you tell us what
centering.
divestment is and what the difference between divestment and canceling is?
Well, somebody who has a lot of privilege cannot be canceled. It's just not going to happen, right? Like canceling meaning that they lose their entire career. It's not going to happen. Especially in an industry that's predominantly run by white cis folks, right? So um, it's just not going to happen. So divesting meaning that we are pulling away from his teachings, from supporting the podcast, um, because it's kind of like that conversation, right? Whenever you are supporting really problematic major corporations, you're voting with your dollar. It's the same thing whenever and also why would you want to take yoga with somebody who isn't in the actual work of yoga, right? So that's what I mean by divesting, by pulling away. So that's part of the process, is like whenever the folks who are marginalized are speaking out on something and there's clear calls to action for you to stand in solidarity, you have to, even if you don't fully understand, right? If an entire community is coming forward and saying, ouch, this hurts,
Mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm,
know,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
you have to listen and you have to take those actions. um and then another way is just to continue building your community and talking. You have a lot of privilege with people that you know really well, right? And so what gets really exhausting for folks in the community having to speak up about their own identities, especially those who have multiple marginalizations, it's exhausting, right? And so it's really helpful whenever allies are doing the work and they're learning, and then they can have the conversations with those that are close to them. It doesn't mean that the change for that specific person or that group of people will happen right away. But if you keep showing up and keep bringing it up, right? Like that's part of the work, which is also uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
You're essentially confronting people, but that's also part of the work from or like divesting from whiteness as like an overarching culture, right? So it's all a part of the greater work of dismantling white supremacy and creating a better world for all people. It's all a part of it. It's all these systems are intertwined.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, it's definitely I mean, I think it's great. I think it's always fun to rub up against those edges of our own belief system and our own unconscious conditioning that we may have, because as a yogi you think, oh, I've not discovered this, or what are my assumptions, or where are my blind spots in this,
Right.
um, where it's like, if it's not part of your ecosystem, it's easy to disregard and to say, oh,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter, that's not for me. I mean, these conversations started a few years ago, actually. My older sister's educator, she's a teacher at a UC system. I'm like, I don't know. I don't actually know. She's a teacher. I'm like, is it a UC or it's just a college? She teaches for college. She's an English literature teacher. And but these are conversations that she brought up many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
as like the education system begins to change, and her and
Right.
her partner, who's also an educator at a private university here in LA, they were the ones bringing this information into the fold. And it was so fascinating for me to hear, like, okay, how does this apply to my life? And I'm like, oh, I'm a teacher in a public space. So
Right.
that means that my responsibility as somebody in a public space to know and assume that there will be people who feel marginalized, who want to be seen, who want
Right.
to be acknowledged, and to do the work that it's going to take in order to you know rub up against those hard edges and be like corrected and say the wrong
Yeah.
thing and confront those unconscious biases within myself, you know, that
Right.
we
Exactly.
don't like to think about. We like to think, oh yeah, like, oh, I have a gay friend, you know, and it's like,
Right.
okay, and like, so what? That doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's like, oh, but you know, um, that doesn't mean that you're educating yourself or having the dialogue necessary to make sure that everybody at large feels included. It's like, I have a gay
Right.
friend. It's like, okay,
So
so
therefore I don't have to do any work.
yeah, it's like, I have
That's
a
not how that works.
exactly, I have a Hispanic friend, or I have a
Right.
black friend, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, that's no longer enough, you know.
No.
And I don't mean to say, yeah, I do. It's really not. I'm like, I don't mean to say it like, I'm like, yes, I do. It's really not. It's really not enough. Like, we've graduated from the tokenism of
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
experience. And now we're being called to level up and to
Mm-hmm.
move through this transformative process um, with our community, you know,
Yeah.
brothers, sisters, non, what is it? Non-gender identifying, non-binary, um, people, you know, trans,
Mm-hmm.
everybody, like we have to interlock with each other and go through this process together.
Yeah. Yeah. It is very much it's really urgent, right? It's like, aren't we all sick of living in a world where it's just so hard? Right? Like it's just so hard just to be who you are.
Yeah.
Um, and if you hold a lot of privilege, like maybe you don't identify with that, like maybe that's not your experience, but I bet there are other ways that you can kind of tune into where you're kind of held back from being yourself because of the way that dominant culture expects us all to be. um yeah, so we very much need to all link arms, and to also understand that affinity spaces are going to be needed, meaning that um it's going to take a while for
Yeah.
spaces that are run by like cis white folks to become safer for all people. And so in the meantime, we're creating our own spaces, right? Like queer trans only spaces or BIPOC only spaces, right? And these are really important spaces that are needed. And so I feel like, you know, also supporting with your marketing and with your money to these affinity spaces, or these people that are holding these affinity spaces, is really important. And also, I always say, like, hire trans people to come, be a part of your yoga teacher trainings to bring this education. And not only that, hire trans people because they're great at teaching yoga, because they have a lot to offer, right? People who are different than you bring a different lens on whatever topic your space holds, right? And so it's also just expanding, like you said, beyond tokenism, just so you can check it off the box. um why wouldn't you want a diverse group of people involved in your community? Like, wouldn't that make your space more rich? Wouldn't it make it, just better all the way through? um so there's so many, when we talk about like, if I consult somebody, it's going to take several sessions for a long time to really, if I'm consulting a business, for instance, like, it's going to take a long time to really change all the ins and outs, right? I mean, this work it's a lot. It goes beyond, like I said, just learning gender inclusive language. It's so much more than that. Um, but you just have to start. You just have to begin somewhere.
Yeah. I love that. That is a great place to conclude. And by no means is this concluded, of course.
Never.
This just shows us how much work we need to do. And if anything, it's just supporting these movements, and not even just a movement, just supporting and acknowledging what is happening right now, the revolution that's happening right now, the transformation that's happening right now. I think it's important for us to even just have the conversation, to ask questions, to educate ourselves to do what is suggested and what they are saying to do, which is take action. I think that's
Yeah.
the biggest misstep that we take. It's we can
Yeah.
acknowledge, we can, read an article on the New York Times and be like, oh, I know what cisgendered uh, men means or whatever. And it's like, okay, no, there's
Right.
more to this
We can get
experience.
really into, a lot of the work stops at intellectualizing, right? And so, I want to help folks put that in what you're learning and intellectualizing into action, because that's where we need it. We need it in action. It's not helpful if it just lives up there in your head. Right.
Yeah.
So, and then one more thing I want to leave people with is, because I know like a lot of people, if these are identities that are out of your scope, if you've never heard of them, or it feels like, oh my gosh, this is so new. What I want to tell people is that pre-colonial times, these identities existed. These identities have been around always. It's just through the act of colonization. And I think out of like 200 and something countries in the world, like 200 of them have been colonized by Europeans. So this is a worldwide domination that then eradicated, whether through murder or assimilation, completely erased these identities, right? And so this process is really, really important for people to break free and to self-identify, right? Like this is a part of the deep healing that we all need from the effects of colonization. Like we all hold trauma from that. And so if you're one of those people that's like, oh, this is so new, it's just too much, just remember that it's not new. This is like literally since the beginning of time, these identities have existed, and a multitude of cultures all over the world. So this is a reclamation process, and it's really important for the movement, for the revolution, as you were saying. So yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. And for the people that are listening to this or watching this, where can they go for more information?
Yeah, you can always follow me on the good old Instagram. I'm sure you all know it well. It's just my name at Maygen Nicholson. uh, and then you can sign up for my newsletter. It's at my website, www.megannicholson.com/subscribe. And that way you're just kind of kept up to date with everything I offer. But Instagram is where I do most of the education, and you'll also always be updated on what I have going on, which is a lot all the
Cool.
time.
Yes,
Yeah.
constantly. And we here at Radically Loved love them so much. And we're so grateful to have had this experience and to be able to open the door for this conversation. Thank you so much for reaching out. And it's anytime I see you or I see your face, I instantly get happy. So there's always
I love
that as
it.
well. So thank you so much. And for everybody listening, please share this with your friends or somebody who you feel would gain great value from. And we always love to hear your feedback on these conversations. So don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. All of the links that Maygen mentioned will be in the show notes link. So you can go there and reach out to her directly. But before I let you go, I will ask you the final question I ask everybody that's on the show.
Oh, yes. I forgot about this. Let's do
how
it.
how do you feel radically loved?
I feel most radically loved in community of like-minded folks who are doing this work on a really deep level. That's where I feel most radically loved.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you for
having
sharing. Thank you
me.
for being here. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.